Hey, what's up guys? Today we're gonna take a step back, we're gonna do something a little bit different. I was playing on my Les Paul the other day and I just had noticed that it's gotten super out of whack since the move to Arizona. You know, obviously the hotter temperature, the drier climate, all that stuff can kind of affect your guitar in ways you don't want it to. So today we're gonna go over like a general setup on a guitar. Back up in Bellingham, Washington, I was the guitar tech at Guitar Center before we moved down. And just so many times people would bring their guitar in and it would just need like a couple little tweaks. But because you're bringing it into a shop, it'll cost you anywhere from like 60 to 100 bucks to fix it. This isn't anything you need like a shop to be able to do. I obviously live in an apartment. So I think working on the coffee table is gonna be just fine for us. So more or less today, we're gonna break down a setup in 5 steps. 1, the strings you're using. 2, cleaning and conditioning the fretboard. 3, tweaking your truss rod and your saddles. 4, setting your intonation. And then 5, setting your pickup heights. Pickup heights, I feel like that's one that gets overlooked a lot of the time in a setup. And just to make everything sound nice and even, it's something I like to go over. So step 1 is going to be finding the right strings for you. And honestly, I'm not going to talk about like different brand choices or things like that because honestly, at the end of the day, that just comes down to personal preference. Whatever you like the feel and sound of. So many times when I was teching, people would bring their guitars in and they'd be wanting like drop C sharp or drop B, these super low tunings, and then they'd pick out like a 9 gauge for me to put on it. Basically, that's not something you want to do. The whole thing of finding a good string for your tuning is we want to make sure we're maintaining string tension. If you pick too light of a string for too low of a tuning, it's just going to get really floppy, chords are going to sound out of tune, it's going to be just a nightmare for you. That's not something you want. So more or less, I just say to people, whatever you like the feeling of in standard, you want to go up a string gauge for every half step you go down. Usually in standard, I'm a 10s guy through and through. It doesn't matter if it's like Les Paul or Strat or whatever kind of guitar, I usually just play 10s, so it's what feels right to me. Since we're setting this up for E flat, we're gonna make sure we're going up a step from 10s. We're gonna be putting a set of power slinkies on, a set of 11s. I just play slinkies on all my guitars. They feel good, they sound good, and they're $6. So definitely a big fan on that. So let's get into it. Let's get this guitar all prepped. Obviously, first thing we gotta do, we gotta take off our strings and make sure we can prep this to clean up the frets and fretboard. I've got one of these little winder, cutter, pin puller deals. But honestly, if you have extra time on your hand, you don't even really need this. Alright, so now that we've got the strings off on this, it's time to get into step 2, and that's going to be cleaning and conditioning your fretboard. You're going to want to pick up a couple things. First being some steel wool. This is some quad-aught, just like as fine as you can really get. The steel wool is going to do a couple things. Not only is it going to take off any of the corrosion or rust on your frets, it's going to help polish them up to a nice shine, and it's also going to take off some of the finger cheese from your fretboard. Now, the big problem with using steel wool is it tends to flake everywhere. So what you're going to want to do is pick up a little bit of blue painter's tape and tape off your pickups. That way all the little shards and flakes of it aren't going to get stuck to the magnets on it. And then the other thing, since it flakes everywhere, I don't like to do this in the house. I go outside to do it because otherwise it's going to get everywhere. It's going to be a real bitch. After you've steel wooled it, you're just going to want to go through and hit it with a little bit of cleaner or solvent. I've got some mineral spirits here. Naphtha is usually what I use, but I didn't want to wait and order something from Sumac to do it. Basically, you just want to use some sort of wood cleaner that's going to evaporate and not leave a residue. Once you've gone through and cleaned everything though, it's going to kind of dry out your fretboard. So you want to go through and hit it with a little bit of fretboard oil too. This is the Music Nomad stuff, the F1 oil. I've used it hundreds of times. Lemon oil is something I've used a bunch too. Whatever oil you're going to be using, you just want to make sure it's not something that goes rancid. You don't want to be using coconut oil. You don't want to use olive oil or anything like that. Mineral oils and citrus oils, those are totally fair game on your fretboard. When you're steel wooling your fretboard, you want to make sure you're going this way with your steel wool. Don't go like this and scrub deep, because you're going to scratch the shit out of your fretboard if you do that. So I'm going to jump outside and start steel wooling. Alright, I got all that steel wooled up, and you can see the magnets definitely like to grab onto that steel wool. So once you've got everything all set, to make sure you don't just throw it everywhere, just roll it up and keep all that shit inside. So next thing we're going to do, we're going to hit it with some of these mineral spirits here. Make sure you crack a window before you do this, because this shit stinks. Doing this is just going to help take off all that finger cheese. Yeah, and this wasn't even that bad. Look at all that we took off. Alright, once you've given that just a couple minutes to evaporate and fully dry, we can go through and hit it with some of this fretboard oil. Honestly, with this stuff, a little goes a long way, but a lot goes an even longer way. So I tend to just pipe this on super heavy. Whatever doesn't get absorbed, we're gonna wipe away anyway. So as long as you're not like flooding it completely, you should be perfectly fine. Alright, since I'm in Arizona and it's so dry, I'm gonna straight up just give this a couple minutes to drink up. I wanna make sure I get as much hydration as I can right now. Okay, who here's actually had a papaya? I never have. Saw one at the store the other day because they have shit like this down here. It's fucking delicious. Does everybody know this? Alright, fretboard's looking wonderful. It drank up that oil. It was really needing it. Alright, now we're going to get into step 3, and that's going to be tweaking the truss rod and the saddles. And that is probably the main piece in a setup, you know, getting the action set. And there's honestly not a one-size-fits-all or anything. Everybody has different preferences. I'm one of those weirdos that I kind of like a little bit higher action. I want to make sure that, like, when I go for a bend, I'm like holding on to the string rather than just lightly pushing it up against the fretboard. I feel like I can just manhandle the guitar a little bit better that way. My buddy Diego, he likes the strings basically laying on the frets, as low as you possibly can go. And now one is definitely not better than another, but the big thing of when you go too low of action, not only is it going to get kind of spanky sounding and buzzy in areas, but you can actually have some issues when you go to bend. It'll kind of choke out and you'll lose the note. Obviously, if it's too high, it's going to be uncomfortable to play, so you just got to find the sweet spot for you. You know, I just say, what's low enough? So to do that, let's string this bad boy back up and get to tweaking. When you're winding the strings here too, to make sure you get it all to wind properly, I always tell people you generally want around like 4-ish fingers of slack. Once you get that set, you get it a little kink here, and that's going to make sure that you have enough slack to get, you know, the proper amount of windings here. If you either don't have enough or have too many windings, you're gonna have some issues getting your tuning set. I hear a lot too about the whole under and over theory, and honestly I think that's all a bunch of hoopla. If you're winding your strings properly and your guitar is set up properly, it's gonna stay in tune. The whole under-over thing, I think, just makes it harder to change your strings. And when you do that as often as I do, I want it as easy as I can. Now on your thinner strings, you can almost go for a little bit extra slack. Because they're physically thinner, you can actually get more winds on them before it's gonna become a problem. Alright, I got the strings on here, so let's make sure we get it tuned up. You never want to adjust your truss rod while the strings are off, and I say that because once your strings get brought up to tension, it's going to pull your neck. So all your adjustments, I say it should be done while you're tuning. Good old stretch, and then we'll go in and tune them again. Alright, I've got this all tuned up. Let's snip these whiskers so that I don't gouge my eyes out. So like I said, my guitar was already out of whack, and I can just instantly hear 0 through 4 is super buzzy. Not really what I'm going for. 12 through 15 is perfectly fine. We're not choking out when I go for a big bend. So right there, I know that my saddle's probably at least close to where we want it. The main adjustment we're going to be doing is with the truss rod. Just as like a good rule of thumb, anything below the 7th fret, you'll want to adjust with the truss rod. Anything above the 7th fret, you'll want to be adjusting with your bridge or your saddles. So since we know that it's down low, I got to tweak my truss rod. In my case right now, the truss rod is actually pulling the neck instead of flat, it's pulling it into a back bow. So all we've got to do is loosen the truss rod, and that'll let the string tension pull it back up to flat. So all you have to do to fix that, get a little truss rod key. If you didn't get one with your guitar, go to any music shop. I guarantee you they have a bucket of 100 of them just sitting there. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. I like to go a quarter turn at a time. Any more than that is a significant amount. All right, got the truss rod adjusted, and instantly I can hear the buzz is gone. So luckily that was all I really needed to do. It's just a minor tweak to your truss rod. Let's just say you've tweaked your truss rod and you're still having issues, whether it's super high action or up top it's still buzzing. All you gotta do is adjust your bridge here. Now, certain guitars, you'll adjust individual saddles. On a Les Paul, you just adjust the left or right side. Let's just do it so you guys can see what I'm talking about. If you have the issue or up top, super spanky and gross sounding, you just know that your bridge is too low here. And all we gotta do is take it up little by little. Make sure you don't snap your strings, but take it up until it starts to not fret out. Now, a little bit of spank isn't a problem. You just wanna make sure you're not fretting out. When you go for a bend, you're not gonna be choking out. And notes are ringing out true even when I go for a big bend there. So we know that's sitting really good. And honestly, this is like almost lower action than I like. Even though we're not buzzing, since I want to get to my ideal action, I can either adjust it at the bridge or at the truss. I'm gonna give it another little like 1/8 of a turn here on the truss rod. So I've got the truss and the saddle here sitting in a good spot. But to double check that, just play your guitar for a bit. See if you like it. See if you want to make any tweaks. Yeah, feels good to me. All right, we're moving in here because the next part is intonation. And the only actual strobe tuner I have is in Pro Tools here. You want to make sure when you're intonating, you're using a strobe tuner because it's the most sensitive. When something's sharp, it's going to go one way. When it's flat, it's going to go the other way. The goal is to get it moving not at all, or ideally as little as possible. Something like that. Now for intonation, that's all set at our saddles here, how close or how far they are. So to check your intonation, first thing, you want to make sure your string is in tune. You're going to check your 12th fret harmonic to fret it. When I fret, it's ever so slightly going sharp. So to fix that, we need a slightly longer scale length to make it a little bit flatter. You just take your little screwdriver, I'm gonna move it back almost nothing because that was so close. Boom, that looks beautiful. And we move on to the next string. Make sure you're set. This guy's a little sharp too, so We're going to take him ever so slightly back. That looks beautiful. Our G string, same thing. All of these I'm probably going to have to do the same thing, just a slight touch back. Our D string is a little bit flat, so we're going to bring him a touch forward. That's sounding good to me. So the last step is we're going to set our pickup heights now. We're not only going to set them in relation to each other, as far as height goes, but we're going to set them from the low string to the high string as well. So first thing I like to do is let's make sure they're even from low to high. And all you got to do is just play from one side to the other. Neck sounds pretty good. My bridge pickup, I can tell, is a little bit high on the bass side. Alright, sounding good there. And that's just to make sure that your strings sound even, from one side of the neck to the other. If your pickups have these screws on them, that means they have adjustable pull pieces as well, where you can actually change the volume of each individual string. But being 100% honest, I don't really recommend you do that unless you hear like one string in particular is noticeably weaker. Otherwise, you just open up a whole can of worms. Working one side to the other is going to be just fine for most guitars. When it comes to actually setting the heights of the pickup, there's a couple things to consider. If you go too high, you're going to have issues with magnetic interference on the string to where it's almost not going to ring out the same. It's going to be almost out of phase sounding because the magnets are physically pulling on the strings and they're not able to sustain the way they should. But on the other side of that, if you go too low, I find that I lose a lot of pick attack. I like a really defined strum. So the last thing I want to do is lose that. We just got to find the sweet spot to where when you're on your neck pickup, it's really nice and warm, light and easy. And when we flick it to our bridge, you want the slightest raise in volume. Because usually when I'm flicking down to the bridge, I want to chug. I want this to be heavy. And so to do that, again, you just got to take your pickups here. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Tightening it is going to tighten the screw in, raising the pickup. Loosening it is going to bring the pickup down. Because we know we have the tone even side to side, you want to make sure however many turns you do on your bass side, you do on your treble side. That way you're not going to mess up what you just did setting them side to side. So yeah, guys, that's basically it. You don't have to go into a guitar shop. You don't have to pay $100 to fix it. Literally, these few minor tweaks are gonna make such a big difference on your guitar. This thing was so messed up the other day, I physically couldn't play it. It was just fretting out and so spanky all over the place. And now I don't know if I'm gonna be able to put it down for a couple hours. Obviously, different guitars need different things, depending if you had like a Strat with a floating tremolo, you might have to adjust the claw springs in the back and just little things like that. But overall, this is the basic thing you need to do for a setup. Find the right set of strings, clean up your frets and fretboard, tweak your truss and your saddles, intonate it, set your pickups. It's gonna play like a brand new guitar. If you really wanna be meticulous about it all, you can get one of these string action rulers. But honestly, just trust yourself. You'll know when something feels good. You don't need a number to tell you that it feels good. So yeah, those are just kind of my pointers for doing a setup on your own. It doesn't have to be this huge daunting task. Like I said, I'm in an apartment and I did it all here. you can too. It's not that hard. Any tweak you do can be tweaked back. So just start playing around with stuff. You'll know when something feels good. So yeah, I guess that's it. If you made it this far, please smash that like button. Please subscribe to my channel, and I guess I'll see you guys next time. Thanks. Take it easy.